Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about Canada's strategy in AI, how we're doing it in partnering for the future. As was introduced, I'm the Associate Vice President for International Partnerships for the University of Toronto, and my role is to help build partnerships between the university itself with other institutions, other governments, and industry. So the AI interest, and we just heard a terrific talk about opportunities and the particular challenges, how we're trying to address this in Canada, and I'm going to kind of drill down to the provincial level and then down to the university itself. So really to point out, and this may be common knowledge to most of you here, is that Canada is a relatively small country, but we are spread out. And what we've been doing is really developing a strategy where we take a look at our talent and we develop regional centers of expertise in AI. And I'm going to give you a sense of how this has gone over the past few years, how we got to where we are today, what are strategies that we're applying now in Canada itself, and methods that we're using to engage our industry and our corporate and our university partners to build this strong ecosystem and infrastructure in the country. So just to give you a kind of a context about how big we've become over the past couple of years, and we just sort of saw the explosive growth of AI even in the last 5 or 6 years, this really just illustrates in kind of a nice visual the scale of the opportunities in Canada right now. We've got over 650 startups in the space, 60 different investor groups, which is clearly of interest for those who are trying to raise funds to drive things. And in order to get those investor groups interested, we've got over 40 different accelerators and incubators, primarily focused in the AI initiatives itself. And this map here really illustrates where those centers are located. The size of the blobs obviously tells you where our major centers actually are. And Toronto is anyone who knows Canada, we always consider Toronto to be the center of the universe. Toronto there as being the largest bubble of opportunities. And so just to give you some context of really what started, and our previous speaker indicated the whole deep learning started in 2006, 2004, and we can kind of debate the starting point, but really the initiative that was put forward by an organization in Canada called CFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, and where they launched sort of test programs and test bubbles. And Jeff Hinton at the time became the chair of what was this initiative around Learning in Machines and Brains program. And arguably this started building off of his very core curiosity-driven research, going back actually even longer, 20 years before that, funded by our NSERC Research Council, a very small curiosity-driven project, and then it sort of blossomed into this initiative here, which is really to focus and understand the architects and mechanics of the brain, but using obviously computational approaches to do this, neural nets and so on. And this really gave the basis of the deep learning paradigm itself. So he was the program director, and what's interesting is if you notice that we had those 3 regional centers spread across the country, they all came by alumni effectively from this program, or directors of the past program. Joshua Benyo in Montreal, Jeff, who's based in Toronto at the Vector Institute, and I'll give you a bit of a blurb about Vector, and then Rich Sutton, who's at the University of Alberta. And those are our major centers for AI and deep learning across the country. And so CFAR has been a very strong supporter of this initiative, and this really led to what is being basically described as sort of the first country to develop an AI strategy, and that was the development. It's relatively modest amount of money, $125 million spread across the country, in a pan-Canadian AI strategy. The typical Canadian way of spreading peanut butter across the country. We don't put all the money in one center. We do tend to spread it into multiple spaces. But in this case, we wanted to spread our dollars across 4 different pillars. Establish centers of excellence in AI research and innovation, build expertise by creating chairs, and would part of the goal actually be to address that real challenge that was really eloquently described earlier, which is how do you develop the next generation? Where are those teachers? Support a national research community in AI, and also very importantly, and we're all aware of this now, is understand the challenges that innovations in AI present in the context of sort of the social, ethical, policy, and legal implications of advances in AI itself as a field. So it's important for us to recognize what those challenges actually are. So these represent the 4 pillars for the strategy. And so really, I'm just going to kind of go through those relatively quickly, but we've got these 3 centers that were established, Amy based in Alberta, This illustrates sort of the current size of the faculty, about 14 faculty there spread across those specific areas of interest: game theory, social network analysis, and natural language processing. And you'll see that that actually pervades all of them, as you might expect. But this also illustrates the partnerships that are developed. The University of Alberta being the core academic institution, Alberta Innovates, which is the provincial research agency, which provides funding for that. And then you've got your corporate partners coming in, Borealis AI, which is supported by our Royal Bank of Canada, Mitsubishi coming in as well, and then small startups such as DeepMind and others in Tech Edmonton, which would represent kind of the innovation center in Edmonton. So it really points out that our ecosystem and the partnerships we build are really ones which spread across the continuum. You include the academic institutions, you include big corporations, but you also include kind of those intermediate companies as well, and efforts to kind of drive innovation through local incubation. In Montreal, we have the Mila Center, and their focus is slightly different: computer vision, medical imaging. And again, you see the same kind of partners coming into play here. Right? You see the University of Montreal and McGill, the two largest institutions in Montreal and in Quebec in terms of research activity. You've got our Royal Bank again with another Borealis AI research initiative. You've got the Quebec government coming in to provide provincial support. And then you've got your big players, your Google, your Microsoft, Facebook, all again coming in to provide support and partnering into that institution. And then in Toronto, you've got the Vector Institute, and that's the one that's kind of garnered the most attention of recently. And it's got over 20 faculty now, focused on machine learning, neural nets, health applications, quantum computing. Key partner, my home institution, the University of Toronto. Partnering now, rather than just one bank, we've got all the major banks in Toronto. The province of Ontario, and then quite a diverse suite of companies from Uber, NVIDIA, Thales, Google, and so on. I think what's interesting to point out is that of these three different centers, each of them kind of has a different focus and a different bit of a mandate. So Amy and Mila have either startup mandates or specific industry mandates. Vector's mandate is very much a training mandate. In part is how can we build the next generation of researchers in the AI space? And I'll go through that a little bit later. So Vector, and this is a very nice quote from Jeff Hinton, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Vector Institute, again pointing out that the whole point here is how do we build the talent stream for this? How do you recruit the right people to build into Vector? How do they work on the fundamental science that's of interest to the AI space? And then what is the connection with the university? Right? So one thing that's interesting, and we hear this a lot, is sort of we want to partner with Vector. How do we get these graduate students? And the interesting point is that the Vector Institute itself represents kind of an integrator of activities across multiple institutions. That there's at least 5 or 6 different academic institutions in Ontario for which Vector scientists are cross-appointed as adjunct faculty, or you have faculty of those institutes that are appointed as scientists inside Vector. And that really provides the continuity between the two different institutions. And so the reason for positioning it in Toronto, and I'm going to show that a little bit later as well, is really just the size of the enterprise in the Toronto space. Key point there, Toronto is the home of more than 200 AI-enabled firms which have raised over $2 billion as of 2016. As you can imagine, it's now near end of 2018, so that number is considerably higher. We've got this large corridor of activity. In the original slide I showed there was a pretty big blob, which was Waterloo, next to the bigger blob, which was Toronto. When you integrate that corridor together, you've now got this incredibly diverse, strong tech corridor of talent, nearly 250,000 tech workers, larger than, or almost the same size as what you'd have in Silicon Valley, all in one particular space. So it's a tremendous opportunity for the region. You have this tremendous powerhouse of institutions and academic integration. And so we're starting to see incredible interest in groups moving into the region to take advantage of partnering with Vector. Vector's focus, again, in the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. And again, this is a slide which would not be of, everybody's very familiar with really the direction this takes. So what's interesting is that this is the current suite of Vector researchers. They're all appointed as scientists at Vector, but they've also hold tenure track positions at some of the various institutions. So on the far left there in the upper box, you've got Alan Asper-Guzik. He's a C150 Canada Research Chair. He was recruited out of Harvard University. He's a machine learning person using artificial intelligence for materials design. He moved to Toronto just as of July to do that particular work. We've got Sonia Fiedler, Quade Morris, who's in the sort of bioinformatics space, Frank Ruzik, who does natural language processing around medical applications. So a lot of these faculty members here are appointed either to the University of Toronto. They could be tied into a McMaster University or Guelph University as well. And again, the primary motivation here is really to help build the talent stream, the talent pool itself. So as I pointed out, part of in addition to the research centers themselves, part of the goal was to build talent, recruit people in to hold CFAR AI chairs, so 29 chairs spread across the country through the 3 different research centers, and then also to run a training program and workshops. And so this really illustrates what's going on. You've got NIPS in 2018 happening in Montreal, actually in 2 weeks, as sort of the largest sort of natural language and intelligence conference there. So it really points to what we're trying to do in Canada in terms of summer schools and training opportunities. And we add to that workshops in the area of policy and understanding the social implications of the AI initiatives themselves. So that's kind of the CFAR perspective and kind of the larger Canadian context. I think it's important to understand that what's happening is we're driving companies in, but then let's drill down a little bit more, down into kind of Ontario, right? So we've got kind of the largest province, largest concentration of research and AI initiatives. And so we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the Ontario space itself. So we've got over 300 AI startups in Ontario, spread across multiple institutions. We've got AI-focused incubators and accelerators. We've got funding that's coming in from a variety of both VCs as well as the province and the federal government, and just a swath of opportunities to provide support for initiatives in the AI institution or AI directions itself. You've got a large number of academic institutions in the center of Ontario, with the University of Toronto on top, Waterloo, University of Guelph, Ryerson, Laurier, and McMaster, all with very strong AI programs in place. So Ontario is really well positioned for this, and we can see this in terms of the scope, right? So you've got AI, everybody sort of tends to think about the classic sort of self-driving vehicles, but we've got AI's initiatives which extend over 15 different sectors, from media to professional services, healthcare, automotive. Our ICT cluster in Ontario is second largest in North America, nearly 300,000 workers in that space. We actually, and this is kind of scary when I looked at that number, I didn't actually realize that Ontario has 44 different colleges and universities, which is actually rather huge when you think about it. But we generate 42,000 STEM grads each year, the top 5 in North America. So what's interesting, and again, back to our previous speaker's point about talent development, it was really a mandate by the provincial government, in particular with Vector. And the goal really of Vector is to generate and graduate now 1,000 more AI-related master's grads per year by the year 2023. That's to really deal with that particular talent challenge. But on top of that, our provincial government also said, you know, we need to not just do AI, we need to do STEM, right? Because now you're not just talking about AI individuals, you want domain experts as well who can implement it. And so the province has made a commitment to try and increase the number of annual STEM grads by 25% to over 50,000 a year. So this is a real impetus by the province in terms of trying to drive these particular initiatives. Because really AI, as you all know, kind of extends into multiple sectors now. So it's important to get students who have domain expertise, but also understand how they can use these technologies. And so I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a spiel here, and this is courtesy of Jennifer McLean, who's the executive director of what's known as SOCIP. And this is really to show how we're developing and fostering partnerships between industry and academia in the AI space, or broadly in the advanced computing space. And so SOCIP is an initiative which is, I guess, now 6 years old. Actually, they're coming up on their renewal process. And this is a partnership between the research-intensive academic institutions in Ontario and IBM to really help industry bridge this innovation gap in terms of accessing high-performance computing, and really providing the appropriate access to the technologies. Right? So IBM came in and said, we'll provide that hardware support. The government came in and said, we'll provide some financial support behind there, and you've got the academics who are there to help run the research programs in partnership. So SOSIP is really an enabling platform. And what's intriguing is that this really kind of started out, and I think I was trying to dig up the original acronym, but SOSIP was sort of Southern Ontario Supercomputing Innovation Platform. And what they're really starting to do now, and through my office, is really extend it out to a national and into an international sphere as well, providing those same resources beyond just Southern Ontario. And so what SOSIP really does is, again, provide the research expertise and the leading-edge technology to help partner directly into industry. Really focus on those challenges, providing the tools and the project funding to help do this. And so they've been quite successful. In fact, I'm on their scientific advisory committee, and I see just the wealth of projects that are in play right now and the different strategies they have to help people come in and access these particular platforms. So they're really building out a really core talent stream as well as hardware platforms for folks. So it's really a case of having industry understand the potential of using high-performance computing and AI strategies in their particular industry challenges. And so what the SOSIP platforms provide is really the entire swath of hardware capabilities, if you think of it that way, from cloud analytics to the Blue Gene systems, to large memory systems in terms of platforms, so they can tailor the hardware to your particular problem, or you can see which hardware is most appropriate for your kind of problem. Agile computing, GPU acceleration, to access to Watson. And so these are all strategies they have in place, clearly all IBM-centric at the moment, but we'll see how that changes if it does as they go forward for their next round of funding to build out the next generation of SOSIP. But really the key here is how do you link academics and the talent with the industry problem and the industry research teams themselves. The idea is really develop these collaborative research programs. Industry puts together the team, academia puts together the team, SOSIP provides the hardware platform to help integrate the two. And what's intriguing is you start to hear stories about how industry says, we weren't entirely sure if this high performance approach would work or this AI approach would work. Your academic team has now confirmed to us that this is the way to go. And in fact, now we're going to go down the path of actually setting up our own hardware or build our own platforms out to do this particular work. So it's been a really successful endeavor. This is an example of what one particular project here, and just to give full credit to other institutions. I'm not going to just pick University of Toronto opportunities here, but this is one from the University of Guelph, where a researcher has been working with Greenland International to look at watershed modeling and trying to understand the effects of climate change and using this to develop predictive models and strategies, right? So again, using the high-performance computing platforms to do this kind of work. And there's lots of different examples throughout SOSIP of how they've actually done this. Everything from large companies. In fact, I saw a project which was with the Globe and Mail, which is our national newspaper, to understand how their advertising schemes and looking at readership retention was being partnered with researchers from our College of Art and Design in terms of developing a visualization tool which would allow them to understand how their readers were interacting with their information. So drilling further down from Ontario down into the Toronto region, what is happening in Toronto and why are we getting such a dramatic drive of folks coming into the region to try and understand the importance of what's going on in the space and the activity? Toronto is, again, we're so close to everything, 90 minutes from the different major centers on the East Coast. We're arguably the most diverse economy in terms of the sectors that are represented in the Toronto space itself: clean tech, life sciences, food and beverage, financial services. We're sort of the fintech center for Canada, in fact, and advanced manufacturing. In fact, we have one of an advanced manufacturing supercluster, which is just based just outside of the core of the city. Toronto is considered a smart city. 18,000 tech companies, 400,000 tech employees. Very large economic impact. And I think what's key here is that we have an enormous biomedical complex in the region with our world-leading research hospitals partnered with the University of Toronto. And I like to say arguably that it's larger in terms of a health research complex than the Boston complex itself. And with the advent of sort of Vector and Waterloo and all these other schools in the region, we have probably the largest concentration of AI experts in the world concentrated in this very small region itself. Again, third largest ICT cluster in North America. So here's an interesting kind of geographic way of looking at Toronto. So this is obviously a drone picture of the city of Toronto, looking down towards our iconic sort of CN Tower. But I'm going to throw some icons up to sort of show you what's here and why it's become such an important epicenter for activity. On here, you've got the University of Toronto, right? So that's literally placed right on top of campus. We've got our Ontario government, which is conveniently located about 200 meters away. So when we need provincial money, we walk across the street and ask them for it. We've got our hospital complexes, which are straight down the street. So again, about 500 meters away from the university. So a direct path towards them. We've got Mars and the Vector Institute connected. Right? So they're all located all within about 500 meters of the university. And then you go further down, you've got the financial district. So you have this enormous enterprise, which is literally within about 5 kilometers, within about a 10-minute walk of everything. You've got everything in one location. Sounds great. It is great. But you can imagine the problem, which is that we need more real estate. Right? We've got a huge problem with actually trying to find ways to position a lot of our companies and partners who want to be in there. So we're actually, the university itself is very actively working with the region to try and build more space in that particular area. Oh, and then Sidewalk Toronto, which is tied to Sidewalk Labs, and the Alphabet Initiative is just down there on the waterfront, which is the Google's Alphabet's initiative around the next generation smart city. So we're working quite actively with that. So this is all in the downtown core. And so we've got Mars. I see Lincoln at the back there. So we've got the Mars Initiative in Toronto, which is the world's largest innovation hub. What's nice here is you've actually got companies fully integrated with the university right inside this large tower just on the south side. They're right literally in between the university and the hospitals. And this really illustrates some of the companies that are physically located in that space. And so if you're a graduate student doing AI research in a particular domain, you are embedded directly with the companies that are right there. They're either right above or below you. Conveniently, there's a Starbucks on the basement or on the ground floor where everybody congregates. And so this has really become a magnet for companies, a real magnet for talent to come into the region. Toronto is the fastest growing market for tech jobs as of 2017. So we've vastly outpaced all of the other regions. So the talent is coming into the region, the companies are there. So I'm going to kind of end off here by sort of pointing out something, and the main reason for this and what's happened is that the University of Toronto has really been kind of the seed for a lot of this. And I think it's important to kind of point out the context. University of Toronto is North America's largest public institution. So we're 90,000 students, 20,000 of those are international students, so on visa, about 11,000 staff and faculty spread across 3 different campuses, our downtown campus and our 2 satellite campuses. So we are large, we're incredibly comprehensive, and we're ranked sort of 5th in the world among public institutions. And so we've got this we actually have more than a critical mass, we have an enormous mass of talent and expertise in this particular space, and it's really helped nucleate so many different activities in the research space. And you know, the most important one in the context for this particular course is really deep learning, right? And the fact that it's, with U of T developed machine learning paradigm underpins technology, as you all know. And this was, again, it started in 2004 officially as deep learning, but again, as I mentioned earlier, it was really something that was nucleated by a curiosity-driven project in Jeff Hinton's lab. And it's really important to realize that government investment in basic research to allow people to do this kind of curiosity-driven stuff, it will have results. It may take 20 years to roll out, but it's critical that the government continues to fund that, and we're really hopeful that the Canadian government continues to do that. But the real key here is that all of this that Jeff's work has been done really led to talent paradigms and talent development. But you look at the leads for all of these companies, right? So Uber, Microsoft, Facebook, OpenAI, Samsung, Tesla, and so on. All of those lead people all came from Jeff's lab, right? So we have this incredible family tree of U of T alumni which trace their way all the way back to Toronto. This was really one of the main impetuses for inventing Vector, was to try and repatriate some of this talent back into the country. It's great that we've helped nucleate and create all of these initiatives as well, but we want to do better, and we can do better by repatriating. And so what's happened in terms of partnering, this is a perfect example. Because of these huge initiatives in the AI space, we've now had big companies come in and start to partner with the University of Toronto, and primarily in part with Vector. One of Vector's real mandates is that in order to partner with Vector, you need to be a Canadian company or have a Canadian base. And so that's been a real impetus between signings with LG. So LG came in, and we had a meeting with them in October of last year, and by July they had come in and set up an AI research lab in Toronto. Partnership with Samsung, Huawei, Fujitsu. These have all happened in the last year. And what's intriguing is that the leads for all these companies, they tend to end up being U of T computer science faculty. So Sven Dickinson on the upper right there is the former chair of computer science. He's been seconded for 2 years to work for Samsung as their research lead for their R&D center, their AI center in Toronto. So these are all large corporations that have built out space and started to drive initiatives in Toronto. We're obviously very happy with it, and a lot of the reasons for these collaborative research partnerships, it's both the talent development, it's also for the companies to get a sense of what's going on in the research space, how it could help with their particular product strategies, and it's a very exciting time for us in Toronto to be participating in this. And so we're very proactive in working with that and looking at opportunities. In fact, just last week, Didi, from China came in and established their R&D lab in North America, their second in North America, just down the street from us. So again, in parallel with their launch of one in Mountain View, they've just launched this one in Toronto. So we're very excited about that opportunity of them coming in and setting up shop in Toronto. So these are all big. Didi's very big, but they all start from small things. And I'm going to end off really with a last example from the AI space, linking into domain expertise. And this is really Brendan Frey's work. Brendan's a professor in electrical and computer engineering, and he is the founder and CEO of Deep Genomics, which is really using AI and data-driven approaches to look at genetic medicine, understand sequencing information, do deep sequencing rapidly using AI technologies. And this is really, again, a terrific opportunity or a terrific example of how you get domain expertise in a particular space mixed in with the AI space, and then leading to the launch of a company. A small startup, Deep Genomics, basically ran through all of the different startup opportunities at the University of Toronto, started their company, and has now since received sort of funding, 13 million US just recently, right, 2017 from Silicon Valley to continue to grow this particular opportunity. So it's really, I hope I've given you over the last half hour or 28 minutes, a very nice overview of the Canadian strategy, drilled down to the Ontario strategy, how Canada has made investments across this space to help grow the AI initiatives, provide the infrastructure, provide the talent support to help grow this enterprise, and then what we're doing to continue to grow these opportunities and really to try and build the talent base, because that's what we feel is the most important component of it. And I end up with the classic U of T slide to remind everyone that I'm from the University of Toronto. So with that, I thank you for your attention.